What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. and Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the Ron Simmons edition of Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin, dropped on Friday, February 18, 2022. Perfectly timed, with it being Black History Month. Ron Simmons, widely considered to be the first major black world champion in wrestling history. So obviously they get into all of that and then the rest of his career and life and whatnot. So a really good interview this week. Usually, at least in recent months, they've had a lot of recent, modern stars. They had, DDP, I guess, back in December, so that's not exactly true. I was thinking of like Jeff Hardy late last year. They had on Rollins at one point, Bobby Lashley, Becky Lynch last month. They've had on a lot of the current talent, which is cool, but it's also cool when they go back and revisit some of the legends. And this wasn't the most newsworthy, eventful episode of Broken Skull Sessions, episode that I've seen up to this point. But it was still very enjoyable, a great conversation between two old friends, and a lot of stories I've never heard before from Ron Simmons. So really good stuff here. They started the episode with Ron Simmons saying it was all worth it, the entire journey, everything he's done up to this point in his career and his life. They recall seeing each other for the last time, I guess, in person, and obviously we're in the midst of a pandemic right now, so this wouldn't make sense, but I guess the last time they would have seen each other, they said was the Raw reunion show, which I believe would have been back in July of 2019. They did do like an old school Raw show, I remember, on the first Raw of last year in 2021. Simmons may have been on that show. I know Steve Austin was not. Stone Cold was on that episode of Raw back in July of 2019, though. That he came out, had that giant reunion at the end of the show. Simmons was probably there as well, so that's probably what he's talking about. So, talking about his life, Simmons mentioned that he almost got placed in an orphanage. His mother died when he was 8 years old. His grandmother passed away. His dad left them. It was pretty rough there for a while when he was first growing up, and he had to grow up fast, he said. He had to move around quite a bit before finally settling in with his cousin at his mother's sister's house, I believe it was. He got to stay in Georgia. He grew up in Georgia, got to stay there instead of moving to Detroit, because it was around the time, around 13, 14 years old, that's football coaches started looking at him because he was so good at football, and high school coaches wanted him on their team and whatnot. He actually also set the state record for the discus throw at 180 feet, which I know nothing about discus, but that sounds impressive. He put everything into football because he was really good at both, and he kind of had to decide which one's going to get me further in my life and career. Football was that one, so he kind of had to give up discus throw. So he put everything into football from that point forward. And it was also the thing that kind of helped him get out of his current situation, not current situation, but his situation growing up and not really having a home or a family or, stuff like that. I mean, he had family, but after his mom passed away, his dad left, grandmother passed away, didn't have a lot of family, let's put it that way. And settling on football would make him successful and make him happy and all that other stuff. So that's why he went with football. In football, he mainly played nose tackle, during which time he won a national championship. He actually almost went to University of Georgia. That's where he was expected to go. That's not where he necessarily wanted to go. It was an option. That's where I guess everyone on his team went from his school, whatever. It was a really prestigious school, or is a prestigious school. But he went to Florida State instead to go play for Bobby Bowden, who I guess did a lot for him growing up. And he felt that he owed it to him to pay a visit to that school, play for them, especially since that school, Bobby had told him, listen, Florida State is not going to offer you as much as other schools, but we will let you play as a freshman. At all those other schools, including University of Georgia that you're looking at right now, they will not let you play as a freshman. May not even redshirt you, whatever that means. I wrote that down in my notes here. So you may have more playing time here than you would anywhere else. And he took that heavily into consideration, ultimately ended up going to Florida State after he graduated from high school. So he talks about putting his picture on a Trans Am during like high school prom, senior prom, I don't really know what he was talking about there. While he was at Florida State, became a 4-time All-American, got drafted to the NFL, didn't do well in Cleveland due to being undersized, he said, but he was happy with what he did in football. From there, he got recruited into wrestling by Hiro Matsuda, and fell in love with wrestling after his grandmother kind of grew up a fan as well, growing up with her. Before she passed, she was a big wrestling fan, so that's where he got into wrestling. First was aware of wrestling anyway. He actually had a connection with Lex Luger, because Luger also played football with him. I think they were on the same team or in the same league or whatever for a few years there. So Luger already knew of Simmons, and Luger was already training to become a professional wrestler with Matsuda. So Luger actually recommended Simmons to Matsuda. Matsuda kind of recruited him into his school or whatever. It was another weird thing because there weren't a lot of black wrestlers in wrestling at the time. And they kind of talk about that a little bit later and why that is, and why Simmons was kind of a groundbreaker in that respect. And then there needed to be more diversity, and Simmons really wanted to take a chance on himself, so he pursued it. But he said the training, he thought it would be easy coming from football, but in the end, it ended up being the hardest thing he ever had to do. He actually had to train rigorously for like 3 months before ever ending up getting an opportunity to set up a ring. Before he could even touch a ring, he had to train. And after that, he hit the ropes nonstop for a month straight. And they show some of the footage from that camp. I forgot who else went to that camp, but it was a pretty rigorous camp. And it really shaped Simmons into the person and competitor he ended up becoming from that point forward. He mentioned the girlfriend that he had at that time. I don't know if that ended up becoming his wife. Maybe he mentioned that and I just missed it. But he said he had a girlfriend at the time and she wasn't really along for the ride. She wasn't really along for the ride as much as he was because she wasn't a wrestling fan. He did get nervous in his wrestling journey early on, didn't want to hurt people because at least in football, you're kind of worrying about yourself and your teammates. In wrestling, you're putting the life and health of your opponent in your hands as well. So that kind of made him nervous early on. They show footage of a match that he had early on in his career, well before this guy ever made it to WWE. But with Yokozuna, it was a very young Yokozuna before either of them ever made it to WWE. Yokozuna also liked being stiff, so it was a very stiff match. Simmons liked being stiff in his matches. Don't take that the wrong way. Dusty Rhodes actually was the one that took Simmons under his wing. He was in charge of WCW at that point. He realized they needed diversity, so they brought in Simmons. I don't think it worked out too well in the early years there for Simmons in WCW. There was a lot of politicking going on, so he went to Japan for a little while instead. In his absence, Bill Watts took over for Dusty. Simmons really liked Bill Watts because Bill Watts, I think, looked at Simmons as a future world champion. And Simmons liked the fact that Bill Watts would see people not doing their job and get rid of them. If they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, he would say, you're out of here. And Simmons kind of looked at him as a head coach of sorts, like from football. He liked that mentality. He liked his approach to molding talent and disciplining people and stuff like that. And Bill Watts kind of took the reins from Dusty, continued to do what Dusty was doing, and making Simmons a star. And he really wanted to make Simmons a star, a world champion on his way out, because he kind of saw the writing on the wall there, Watts did. And he was like, in his mind, all right, if one of the things I can do is put the championship on Simmons, that's what we're going to do here. And had that not happened, who knows if Simmons ever would have become world champion in WCW or elsewhere. They talk about Doom for a little while, himself and Butch Reed. He doesn't know where it came from, Simmons said. He also didn't like being put in a team out of nowhere. It just made no sense to him at the time. This was obviously before he won the world championship. Butch wasn't on board with it either at first, especially since Simmons was so green. And they got Woman put with them, a.k.a. Nancy Benoit. She was later replaced by Teddy Long. He, became their manager after a while as well. But Simmons told Butch, listen, let's just make it work. Let's make this shit as realistic as possible. Everyone knows it's us under these masks, so they are fucking goofy, which sounds a lot like what we see in WWE now. But let's try to make it as realistic as possible, and they did. A lot of great matches there with the Steiners, who Simmons said he had mutual respect for. Got to work with the Rock and Roll Express, which he called a joy. He learned everything from Butch and Teddy Long at that period in his career. They actually rewatch a TV title match that Simmons had with Austin in WCW. Stunning Steve Austin, the man conducting this interview, which was great. Really cool footage there. They tell some story about Simmons going off after a 6-man tag team match that they had, I think, in Japan or something like that. Or they talked touring Japan after that. It must have been a match in the States. But he went off on the people after the match backstage because he couldn't get his shit in. He was really pissed off about that. So he also talks about Japan and the different style over there and the audience, and they like what they like. It's a little different than the audience over here in the States. So anyway, back to WCW. Dusty and Bill were both very much on board in making Ron Simmons a world champion. Vader wasn't on board with it initially, apparently. I don't know why. But he was happy. Simmons was happy that Vader ended up doing business. He said he did a great job in putting Simmons over. Very good match, which they rewatch here. Simmons says he still receives letters to this day about that match, how much it means to people, which is really cool, making them think. Because again, he was one of WWE recognizes Simmons as the first major black world champion in wrestling. There was likely others before him, not many, maybe obviously none as major as Ron Simmons, I would have to imagine. And so that's a big moment, obviously, a huge moment in wrestling history. So the fact that he still gets people talking about that to this day is well deserved. Obviously, as he says, the title win changed his life. He's really happy to have impacted people's lives with that title win. And talking about why not as many black people were in wrestling at that point, and maybe even now, I think he was talking more about then when he mentioned this. But he said stereotypes really discourage black people from entering the business, whether it be the way that they were treated or just that the perception that they wouldn't be stars or whatever the fuck it was. He went against the grain and was successful. So he was really kind of created that groundwork, laid the groundwork for other people that came after him, which is really cool. And he had to take the high road. He knew that in winning the championship and being champion, he couldn't fuck up, because if he fucked up, he would mess it up for everyone who came after him and wanted to follow in his footsteps. And that's also really commendable that he looked at it that way as well. So he did take the high road, and he was a great champion. He also talks about how WCW soon after that had no plans for him. So from there, he left WCW, went back to Japan for a little while. He was close with both Bruce Pritchard and Michael P.S. Hayes. And they were the ones that got him a meeting with Vince McMahon about going to WWF at that point. So he came in as Farouk. Why, I don't know, as opposed to building off what he did as Ron Simmons in WCW. The reason he went as Farouk, I guess, was because they wanted the gladiator gimmick. They had two very different ideas for what this gladiator gimmick would look like. He and Steve Austin laughed the shit. They just fucking laughed their asses off here, looking at the designs and talking about his initial reaction to wearing that dumb leather outfit. His wife's reaction, Ron Simmons' wife's reaction, that was great, and how he was speechless when he first saw the helmet. It gives me flashbacks to Karrion Kross from a couple of months ago in WWE. Like, I mean, some of the shit they have these people wear is just ridiculous. So they actually rewatched his Raw debut back in 1996, I think it was. He said nobody in the business laughed at him and what he was wearing because he was so well respected, even to that point in his career. And when Steve Austin says, what was the point in Vince having you dress up with this goofy-ass character? Again, like I said, as opposed to building off what he did and accomplished as Ron Simmons in WCW. Simmons says Vince probably just wanted more characters, which is exactly why we see half of the shit that we do today, if not more, in WWE, I can guarantee you. They talk Nation of Domination, the impact of that. He didn't like writers trying to write for him. He actually liked the gladiator shit and how goofy he was because it gave him more ammunition for the whole, again, Nation of Domination black stuff, and this is what black athletes are subjected to, blah, blah, blah. Give him a lot of ammunition. He loved his Nation of Domination character and being able to get a lot off his chest in those promos, which is really cool. But like I said, the writers would try to write stuff for him, and it's like, listen, you're not me. So I'm sure the writing process is a lot worse today, but even back then, they were still having people write their promos for them. Not as much as today, I would assume. But even then, he was like, listen, I got to do this myself because only I can tell the audience how I'm feeling and where I'm coming from, specifically when it comes to stuff like this. He actually didn't know that D'Lo Brown was in the crowd for his WCW title win. That was news to him when Steve told him here on the show, so I thought that was cool. Him and D'Lo talk all the time, and I guess he never knew that, so that was crazy that he just found out here for the first time. He was very proud, moreover than anything, for all the success that everyone had post Nation of Domination, and how they all went on to do great stuff even beyond Nation of Domination. A lot of those guys went on to become world champion. Mark Henry, The Rock, Ron Simmons was already world champion. D'Lo Brown wasn't world champion, but he had a lot of success as a mid-card champion in WWE, and just on his own in general. Anyway, so he talks briefly about working with The Undertaker post Nation of Domination, talks about having respect for him, and then transitioning into the Acolytes with Bradshaw. Him and Bradshaw hit it off immediately. And them kind of becoming protection, like helping out this tag team or helping out this star, turned them into the APA, and that was made into their gimmick. They were hired protection for other superstars on the show. They rewatched this great backstage segment they had, I think in 2000, with the Dudley Boys, and the Dudley Boys coming to them, wanting their services, and Ron Simmons saying, listen, if the check bounces, so do you, which I thought was a great line. He looked at Bradshaw as a brother. They were really, really close. He admits that they actually got into legit fights, I would assume not with each other, but with other people on the road, which is funny. And they kind of incorporated that into their on-air characters. They also rewatched another Raw segment back from October of 99 when they got another bar fight, which was well-produced and whatnot. Teddy Long was their designated driver, and they tell a lot of stories about them being pulled over by police. Now, Simmons was drunk, but Teddy was the one that was... he was the one that had to do the breathalyzer test, and I guess Simmons spoke up when he should have. He spoke a little more than he should. The police were about to let him go. Simmons said something. Then they were about to be arrested. The police call for backup. They recognized the APA. They showed off the tag team titles, probably gave him a picture or two, and they let him go. They let him go, which I thought was just hysterical. They recall, they told this story. I've heard this story a million times, but I remember this story being told on Storytime a few years ago, where Teddy Long and Bradshaw were in a car during a snowstorm with Simmons. Simmons had to get out to pee. Teddy thought Simmons was still in the car or didn't leave the car, got back in the car, whatever. And he drives off, and Bradshaw goes, "Oh, how long is this rib going to go on for?" And Teddy's like, "Oh, fuck, we left him there? Holy shit." And then, Simmons was going to say something when he got back into the car, but he couldn't because he was so cold and frozen, which was just, that's such a great story. It's even funnier on Storytime when you can see the animation behind it. Now, all the animation they do is really, really good, so check that out when you get a chance. That was a funny story. He talks about Wrestlers Court briefly. They rewatch another backstage segment with the APA featuring LL Cool J and some woman named Rebecca Stamos. I don't know who the hell that is personally. That's someone famous. I apologize. I have no idea who that is. His hip was shot towards the end of his career there in the early 2000s, and he wanted to wind down. He was eyeing retirement, but he didn't want to tell Bradshaw to ruin their run, not to ruin the run they were on at that point. Thankfully, the idea of a split was pitched anyway by WWE, so he kind of used it as an opportunity to retire, and then obviously JBL took off from there. Got inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2012 over WrestleMania weekend. They show a pretty long clip, some footage from his induction, his speech, and building up to him finally saying, "Damn, it was a great speech." He's a very, very, very good talker, very, great spokesperson, and stuff like that. He's very well spoken, is what I was trying to go for there. He has no regrets regarding his life or career. He's gotten everything that he's wanted out of life. Him and Steve tell a quick story about getting alcohol from some snipers in Iraq, I guess when they went over for tribute to the troops years and years ago. And he wants his legacy to be that he gave it his all, and that he did it with class and dignity in wrestling. So really good interview here, really good conversation. It's less of an interview and more of a conversation with these episodes of Broken Skull Sessions. Always enjoyable. This was no different. Far from the most must-see one I've seen lately or just in general from Broken Skull Sessions. A lot of these stories I have heard before, learned a lot of other stuff I've never heard before. But still some very good stories here on the show. And Simmons and Steve are obviously very good friends. Simmons is great. Steve is always great. He always asks the right questions. And it always comes across as two guys, two old friends, catching up and having a conversation and taking a trip down memory lane. So really good stuff here. Check it out on Peacock now, WWE Network, everywhere else when you get a chance. It clocks in at around an hour and 24 minutes, so just under 90 minutes. Not too long, over an hour mark. Just enough. I thought it was perfect. So be sure to check it out when you get a chance on Peacock. And like I said, WWE Network, everywhere else. And thank you guys for checking out my review of Broken Skull Sessions here today. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. If you haven't already seen, the channel is now WrestleRant. We are all WrestleRant here on the channel. Moved forward with the branding a couple of days ago, so I appreciate your guys' support of the channel. And look forward to dropping a lot more more content, cooler content going forward here as well. So if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit the bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up. Have a great rest of your week, guys. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.